I was signing the last page with a pen that barely worked when the agent across from me smiled and pulled the folder back. "Congratulations, Major Bennett," he said. "It's officially yours." For a second, I just looked at him, then at the keys, then at my own hand resting on the table like it belonged to somebody calmer than me. The office smelled faintly like coffee and printer toner. There was a clock on the wall making a soft, ticking sound. Somewhere out in the hallway, somebody laughed. It all felt normal, ordinary. But I had been waiting on that ordinary moment for years. My house. Not a rental with thin walls and a broken dishwasher nobody wanted to fix. Not another temporary place with somebody else's rules taped over the thermostat. Mine. I thanked him, took the folder, and slid the keys into my pocket. I didn't call my family. I didn't post anything online. I didn't even tell my sister Dana, and that was deliberate. A few weeks earlier, I had found an odd little scratch near the edge of one of my spare keys. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. Just wear. Just metal being metal. But standing there with those new house keys in my pocket, I remembered it anyway. And I remember thinking, very clearly, that silence would be easier than explaining myself. I drove out to the place just after lunch. The neighborhood sat a little outside Dayton, quiet in the way newer developments sometimes are before everyone starts filling them with lawn equipment and barking dogs. The roads were dry. The trees along the sidewalk threw long shadows across the yards. When I turned onto my street, I slowed down without meaning to. The house wasn't large. Tan siding, small front porch, black shutters, a patch of grass out front that still looked too new to belong to anyone. But after 22 years in the Guard, plus side jobs, plus careful saving, it looked better to me than any mansion ever could. I parked in the driveway and stayed in the truck for a minute. That old habit again. Sit still first, scan, breathe, then move. The keys felt heavier than they should have. Most people hear military and picture steady pay and clean uniforms and some simple path through life. That wasn't my version of it. My version was missed holidays, contracts that ended too soon, long drives home after drill weekends, and trying to stretch one paycheck across 2 lives. I worked logistics for the Guard and warehouse shifts on the civilian side when I had to. Some years felt like one long exercise in making things last. Still, I kept saving. I passed on trips, passed on nicer cars, passed on 100 little comforts because I wanted one thing that belonged to me and stayed put when the rest of life didn't. When I opened the front door, the air inside smelled like fresh paint and new wood. Not strong, just clean. The floors gave back a hollow little echo when I stepped in. Afternoon light came through the windows in long, pale stripes, reaching across the empty living room. I shut the door behind me and stood there. No TV, no neighbors through the wall, no footsteps overhead. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the faint tick of the cooling vents. I walked room to room without rushing. The kitchen first, plain countertops, new sink, cabinets with that stiff, unused feel. Then the living room again. Then upstairs, where the bedrooms were still empty except for light and shadow. I opened the closet doors, looked out the back window, ran my hand once along the stair rail just to feel something solid. It's a strange thing, being alone in an empty house you own. It doesn't feel big at first. It feels quiet. I set my duffel by the wall in the living room and sat down on the floor. The boards were cool even through my pants. I didn't mind. For a while, I just looked around and let the silence settle in. That was the part I wanted most. Not the house itself exactly, the quiet inside it. I should probably explain why I kept it to myself. Dana had a way of hearing good news and turning it sideways. If I got promoted, she'd ask whether it came with more free time for family. If I picked up extra shifts, she'd mention how expensive things were getting for her and the kids. A few years back, when I made the mistake of saying I was thinking about buying someday, she laughed and asked what one person needed with that much space. Her son was nearly grown by then. Her daughter was always doing homework at the kitchen table, or so I was told. Dana said they needed room more than I did. She didn't say it loudly. That wasn't her style. She said it like a practical fact, like she was just helping me see reason. And the worst part was that other people around the table nodded. I remember the smell of roasted onions that night, the scrape of forks on plates, her friend Lisa reaching for the salt while Dana explained in a calm little voice that I was lucky I didn't have the kind of responsibilities she had. I didn't argue. I finished dinner, put my napkin beside the plate, and let the conversation move on without me. After that, I stopped giving updates. No more talk about savings, no more talk about listings, no more mention of pre-approval or square footage or neighborhoods. I handled it all quietly. Work, paperwork, inspections, signatures. Just me, the lender, my agent, and a couple of people from the unit who knew how to mind their business. Standing in that kitchen on the first afternoon, I took a travel mug out of my bag and made instant coffee with the little electric kettle I'd brought over. It tasted burnt and thin, but I drank it anyway, leaning against the counter and looking out at the backyard. It was small, a strip of grass, a fence line, one tree near the back corner. Enough. Across the street, an older woman in a pale cardigan was getting her mail. She glanced over, lifted one hand, and I nodded back. Later, I'd learn her name was Mrs. Alvarez. At that moment, she was just a neighbor, and that was enough too. I locked the front door before sunset and checked it twice. Then I checked the back. Then the garage entry. Not from fear, just habit. By evening, I had a sleeping bag spread out in the living room, my duffel open beside it, and my paperwork stacked neatly on the counter. The house was dim except for one lamp I'd brought from the apartment. The light sat in the corner and made the place feel almost settled. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and looked at my phone. 2 unread messages from work, 1 group text from extended family I hadn't opened, nothing from Dana. I put the phone face down. Then I waited. That first night in the house, I didn't sleep much. Not because anything was wrong. Just because silence takes a little getting used to when you've spent years living around noise. In barracks, apartments, hotels, temporary rentals, there's always something. Pipes, doors, traffic, somebody arguing outside, somebody dropping something overhead. Even when it's quiet, it isn't really quiet. This was different. The house had its own sounds. The soft click in the vents after the heat kicked off. A faint creak somewhere upstairs as the temperature dropped. Once, around midnight, I heard what I eventually realized was a branch brushing the side fence in the wind. I lay there in the sleeping bag, hands folded over my chest, looking up at the ceiling and letting it all register. Mine. That word still didn't feel natural. By morning, the light through the front windows was pale and thin. I got up, folded the sleeping bag, and made coffee in the kitchen. The countertop still held the closing papers in a neat stack. Warranty packet, loan file, receipts, insurance documents, a slim envelope with the extra keys. I moved everything into one drawer except the keys. Those I kept with me. I spent the weekend doing the small, practical things that make a place start to feel occupied. I brought over 2 boxes at a time from the apartment, dishes first, bedding, work clothes, a folding chair, cleaning supplies, then the heavier stuff with help from one of the guys from my unit, Tyler, who didn't ask questions and didn't offer opinions. He just lifted what needed lifting and said the garage looked solid. That was one reason I trusted him. He understood that not every milestone needs commentary. By Sunday afternoon, the house still looked mostly empty, but it no longer looked abandoned. There were mugs in the cabinet, towels in the bathroom, boots by the back door. A framed photo of my old platoon sat on the shelf in the living room, slightly crooked because I didn't have a level handy. I noticed things slowly. The way the kitchen got warm light around 4:30, the way the second stair from the top gave a quieter sound than the others. The fact that the front lock caught unless you lifted the handle just slightly before turning the key. That last detail stayed with me. A lock tells you a lot. So does a key. I've always paid attention to objects like that, things that hold a system together: keys, ledgers, schedules, receipts. In logistics, if you stop noticing small details, larger problems show up later when it costs more to fix them. I think that habit followed me home. A few days after closing, I came back from work just after dark and found Dana's name on my phone. Not a call, a text. Heard you moved. New place? I stood in the kitchen with my bag still over one shoulder and read it twice. No hello, no how are you, no congratulations, just that. I set the phone on the counter and washed my hands. The water ran cold at first, then warmed. I dried them on a fresh dish towel and looked at the screen again. I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, another message came in. Kids would love to see it sometime. There it was. Not even a question, really. More like a foot in the doorway. I put the phone face down. Then I heated soup, ate standing at the counter, and let the messages sit there unanswered until morning. People sometimes think silence means uncertainty. For me, it usually means I'm deciding what deserves a response and what doesn't. Dana and I had never been close in the easy way some sisters are. Growing up, she was louder, quicker, better at filling a room before anyone else had a chance to speak. By the time I learned how to hold my ground, she had already built years of practice stepping over lines and calling it normal. If she borrowed money, it was temporary. If she asked for a favor, it was family. If she invited herself into your plans, she acted like you were rude for noticing. Over time, people adjusted around her. They called it personality, or stress, or just how she was. What they really meant was this: it was easier to let her have her way than to deal with the alternative. I never liked that system, but for a long time I participated in it anyway. I helped with school clothes when her son outgrew everything in 6 months. I covered a late utility bill once, then again. I drove across town to pick up her daughter from dance practice when Dana forgot. I told myself it was for the kids. Maybe some of it was, but some of it was habit. Duty turned in the wrong direction. That Friday, one of the neighbors came over while I was dragging an empty cardboard box to the garage. It was the older woman from across the street. She carried a loaf pan wrapped in a towel. "Figured you might not have your kitchen sorted yet," she said. Banana bread. Still warm. Her name was Elena Alvarez. Widowed, retired school secretary. The kind of person who noticed things without making a production out of it. We stood on the porch for a few minutes while the evening cooled down around us. Somebody a few houses over was grilling. I could smell charcoal and something sweet in the sauce. A dog barked once and then stopped. Elena asked where I worked, and I gave her the short version. Guard, logistics, long hours sometimes. She nodded like that told her enough. Before she left, she glanced at the deadbolt while I locked the door behind us. "New place, new locks," she said. "Smart." I told her I was planning to have everything rekeyed anyway, just to be safe. That was true. I'd already scheduled it. The locksmith came Monday. He was a broad man with a gray mustache and a quiet way of moving through the house. No wasted motions, no stories, just tools laid out carefully on a cloth and parts lined up in rows on the counter while he worked. I watched him replace the cylinders and test each key. Front door, back door, garage entry, side access. He handed me a fresh set on a plain ring and said, "These are the only copies unless you make more." I thanked him and put them straight into my pocket. The old keys went into an envelope, which went into the file drawer with the closing documents. Again, habit. If something changes, I keep a record of what it used to be. The next week moved along quietly. Work, home, unpacking, 1 or 2 boxes each night. I bought a used armchair from a couple across town and carried it in myself. I hung 2 sets of curtains. I stocked the pantry with more than coffee and soup. Little by little, the house stopped echoing quite so much, and for a while, that felt like enough. Then Dana called. It was a Sunday afternoon, rain tapping lightly against the back windows. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down a few things I still needed to buy: shelving for the garage, batteries for the smoke detectors, a mat for the mudroom entry. Her name lit up on the screen. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. She sounded cheerful in the practiced way she gets when she has already decided how the conversation is supposed to go. "So," she said, "I hear you finally bought yourself a house." There was no one else in the room, but I still found myself looking at the window. "Yes?" "Well," she said, drawing the word out, "that's a pretty big thing to keep from your own family." I rested the pen across the top of the pad. "I was busy." She gave a small laugh, not amused, just pointed. "Busy buying a whole house without telling anybody." I didn't take that bait. Outside, the rain picked up a little. The gutter over the back corner started to tick. After a pause, she said, "The kids really want to see it." I knew that line. She used the kids when she wanted something to sound harmless. "It's not a good time," I said. There was a beat of silence on her end. Then her tone changed, just slightly. "You always do this." "Do what?" "Act like everybody's asking for too much when all we want is to be included." I looked at the page in front of me. My list sat there half-finished in neat block letters: batteries, shelving, weather stripping. "I'm still settling in," I said. "It doesn't have to be a big thing," she replied quickly. "We can just stop by. 20 minutes. The kids would love the yard." The yard. Interesting that she went straight to that. I kept my voice even. "Not today." Another pause. Then she said, softer now, "You know, sometimes I think you like shutting people out." That kind of sentence used to work on me, not because I believed it, but because it was designed to make me explain myself, defend, backfill, offer something to smooth the edges. "I didn't do any of that," I said. "I have to go." And I ended the call. For a while, the house was quiet again except for the rain. Then I picked up the pen and added one more item to the list: outdoor camera. The camera went up 3 days later. Not because I was afraid, exactly. I just prefer clarity. If something feels off, I'd rather have a record than an argument. That's probably years of military paperwork in me. If it matters, document it. If you can verify it, do. I bought a simple system to start with. Front entry, driveway, back porch, motion alerts to my phone. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to know who came and went while I was at work or away for drill. Saturday morning, I stood on a stepladder near the front porch and mounted the first one myself. The air smelled like damp leaves and cut grass. A lawnmower hummed 2 houses down. Every now and then, a car rolled slowly through the neighborhood and then passed on. Elena came over while I was tightening the last screw. "That for porch pirates?" she asked. "Or people you actually know?" I glanced down at her. "Bit of both." She gave one small nod like that answer made perfect sense. By afternoon, the system was live. I tested the front walk twice, then the side gate, then the back door. My phone chimed each time with a neat little alert and a short video clip. There was something calming about it. Not because I expected trouble, because systems settle me. That evening, I sat at the kitchen counter and made a second list. Step 1, finish basic security. Step 2, keep communication limited. Step 3, don't explain decisions that are already made. I wrote it on the back page of the same legal pad I used for groceries and hardware notes. Maybe that sounds cold. It didn't feel cold to me. It felt orderly. The next week, Dana texted again. "We're nearby. Could swing by for a minute." I was at work when it came through. I looked at the message during lunch, sitting in my truck with the engine off and a sandwich I'd barely started. No notice, no invitation, just motion. I answered with 5 words. "Today doesn't work for me." She replied almost immediately. "You're making this weird." That one I ignored. Later that night, after I got home, I checked the camera feed out of habit. Nothing unusual. Delivery van around noon. A teenager on a bike cutting across the corner of my lawn. Elena walking her trash bin back from the curb. Quiet. I slept better that week than I had in a long time. Not perfectly. I still woke early. Still listened for things without meaning to. But the house had started to feel lived in. My chair in the living room. My boots by the door. 2 framed photos on the shelf now instead of 1. A set of plain gray dishes in the cabinet. Coffee in the pantry. Laundry done and folded in my own room. Simple things. The kind that matter more than people think. Then Tyler asked if he could stop by on Friday with another guy from the unit who was selling a used grill. I said yes. That felt different from family. With Tyler, there was no hidden angle. He brought the grill in the back of a pickup, helped unload it, stood in the driveway talking about rust and propane connections for 10 minutes, then left. His friend took cash, thanked me, and drove off. That was how I liked transactions. Clear. Finished. I spent part of Saturday cleaning the grill on the back patio. The weather had turned mild, one of those early fall afternoons where the light stays soft and the air feels dry and open. I remember the smell of metal warming in the sun and dish soap on my hands. Elena waved from across the street. A couple farther down were raking leaves into neat piles. Normal. Around 3, my phone buzzed. Dana. I let it go to voicemail. Then it buzzed again with a text. The kids are excited. We can be there in 20. I stared at the screen, standing there with a rag in one hand and grease on my fingers. Not can we. Not would today work. Just movement already underway. I cleaned my hands slowly at the outdoor spigot, dried them on the rag, and typed back. Don't come over without asking first. A full minute passed. Then, wow. Then, you really are acting like a stranger. I locked the back door and set the phone down on the kitchen counter. I didn't hear from her for the rest of the day, but the next morning, just after 10, the front camera picked up a car slowing near the curb. Dark SUV, Dana's. I was in the upstairs bedroom folding shirts when the alert came through. I looked at the screen and saw her pull up in front of the house. Her son Ethan was in the passenger seat, her daughter Ava in the back, looking down at a phone. They stayed there for maybe 40 seconds. Then Dana leaned forward over the steering wheel and looked directly at the house. Not waving, not casual, assessing. I stood still in the bedroom with one shirt half folded in my hands and watched her through the feed. After another moment, she drove off. No text, no call. Just the visit. That was when something in me shifted. Not panic, not anger, classification. There are moments when a situation stops being vague and becomes specific. A feeling becomes a pattern becomes behavior. I went downstairs, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote the date and time on the legal pad. Sunday, 10:07 a.m. Dana parked in front of house for under 1 minute. No contact made. Then I tore that page off and put it in the file drawer with the lock paperwork. Again, maybe that sounds excessive, but I have learned that if somebody pushes past one boundary, they usually test the others next. The first actual visit happened 4 days later. I had just gotten home from work. It was after 6. The sky was already dimming, and the porch light had clicked on by itself. I was halfway through unlocking the front door when a car door shut behind me. I turned. Dana was walking up the driveway carrying a bakery box. She smiled the moment I saw her, as if timing was the same thing as permission. "Brought cookies," she said. I kept one hand on the doorknob. "You should have called first." "I did call first. You just don't answer." She said it lightly, almost teasing, but her pace never slowed. Ethan and Ava followed a few steps behind her, both looking uncomfortable in the way teenagers do when they know adults are about to make things awkward. The bakery box smelled faintly sweet, butter and cinnamon maybe. The evening air had cooled enough that I could feel it through my work shirt. "It's not a good time," I said. Dana stopped smiling for half a second. Then she recovered. We're already here. That was always part of her method. Create momentum. Make refusal feel impolite. I looked at the kids, then back at her. 10 minutes, I said. She nodded like she had won something. The moment she stepped inside, her eyes moved everywhere. Not in admiration. In inventory. She noticed the floors, the kitchen counters, the staircase, the size of the living room. Ethan drifted toward the back door and looked out at the yard. Ava stood near the entry rug, quiet, holding her phone with both hands. Dana set the box on the counter and turned slowly in place. "This is nice," she said. I didn't answer. The house smelled like lemon cleaner from that morning, and the faint cardboard scent of unopened boxes still stacked in the dining room corner. One lamp was on in the living room. The rest of the place held that early evening dimness where edges soften a little. Dana walked farther in without being asked. "You've got a lot more room than I expected." I stayed near the kitchen. "It's enough for me." She opened a cabinet, then another. I said, "Please don't do that." "Oh, relax," she replied, smiling again. "I'm just looking." That word sat there between us. Just looking. Just stopping by. Just the kids. Just 10 minutes. Ethan asked if he could see upstairs. "No," I said. Dana looked at him, then at me. "Seriously?" "Yes." Something tightened in her expression then, though her voice stayed smooth. "You don't have to act like we're strangers." I said nothing. Ava finally spoke, very softly. "Mom, can we go?" Dana ignored her. Instead, she stepped closer to the counter where my keys sat beside my wallet and work badge. She didn't touch them. Not then. But I saw her eyes pause there. Only for a second. Still enough. I picked them up and slipped them into my pocket. Her gaze lifted back to my face, and in that brief moment I could tell she knew I had noticed. The room got quiet after that. Even Ethan stopped moving. Dana folded her arms and looked around once more, slower this time. Then she gave a small shrug. "Well," she said, "it does seem like a lot of house for one person." There it was again. Not a compliment. A claim dressed as an observation. I opened the front door. "Visit's over." For the first time that evening, her face hardened without disguise. "You're unbelievable," she said. Maybe I was. But I didn't argue. The kids went out first. Ava quickly. Ethan without looking at me. Dana followed last, pausing on the porch just long enough to say, "You don't need to be this guarded with your own family." I held the door open and answered in the same tone I'd used all night. "Drive safe." After she left, I locked the door, checked the back, then stood in the kitchen without moving for a moment. The bakery box was still on the counter. I opened it. Store-bought cookies in neat rows, untouched. I closed the lid, carried it straight to the trash, and then I looked at the counter where my keys had been sitting. The next thing I did was take out the legal pad and write 3 lines. She looked through cabinets. She watched the keys. No more unplanned visits. Then I took my phone, opened the camera app, and ordered one more device, an indoor camera for the kitchen. The kitchen camera arrived 2 days later. I set it up on a high shelf near the corner where it had a clear view of the counter, the back hall, and most of the kitchen entrance. It was small enough not to attract attention unless someone was looking for it. I tested the angle twice, walked in and out of frame, checked the playback, then saved the clips to a folder on my laptop. After that, I changed a few habits. I stopped leaving my keys on the counter. I kept the spare set in a locked drawer with the closing documents and the old lock paperwork. And I started answering Dana less, not more. That part mattered. People like Dana treat access as a conversation. They keep pushing until your silence starts to look like permission. I wasn't going to let that happen again, so I made rules. Step 1. Keep everything in writing when possible. Step 2. Do not argue in person. Step 3. Record dates, times and details while they're still fresh. I wrote those down too. That week, she texted 3 times. The first one was casual. Hope you like the cookies. I didn't respond. The second came the next morning. The kids said the upstairs looked nice. That stopped me for a second. They had not seen upstairs, which meant one of 2 things. Either she was testing whether I'd correct her, or she was already speaking about the house as if parts of it belonged to her imagination instead of my reality. I still didn't respond. The third message came late Friday. We might need a quiet place for Ava to study sometime. Our apartment's a madhouse lately. There it was, closer to the point. I read it once and set the phone down. Then I made coffee, opened the file drawer, and added fresh labels to a plain manila folder. Dana, texts, visits, notes, no drama. Just a folder. That Saturday, I went out early for hardware and groceries. When I came back, Elena was in her driveway clipping dead leaves from a planter. The morning was cool enough for a jacket. I could smell wet soil and the faint gasoline scent from a leaf blower somewhere down the street. She looked up when I parked. "Your sister stopped by yesterday," she said. I stayed by the truck door for a moment. "Did she?" Elena nodded. "Just slowed down out front. Didn't get out. Sat there a bit." "About what time?" She thought for a second. "Little after 4. I thanked her, carried the bags inside, and checked the front camera archive. There she was, 4:12 p.m. Her SUV rolled up, idled at the curb, then stayed there for almost 3 minutes. Long enough to look, long enough to decide things, long enough for me to know Elena had noticed exactly the right amount. I saved the clip and moved it into the folder. The following Tuesday, Dana called while I was at home finishing laundry. I answered because sometimes it's useful to hear the shape of a person's intentions in real time. She didn't bother with small talk. "I've been thinking," she said, "and honestly, this could help everybody." I folded a towel once and laid it flat on the bed. "How so?" "You've got all that space. We're packed in where we are. It would make sense for the kids to spend more time there." "More time there" was a careful phrase, broad enough to expand later. "No," I said. She exhaled hard into the phone. "You didn't even let me finish." I heard enough. There was a pause, then the familiar shift in tone. Injury first, pressure second. "You act like I'm asking for something outrageous. You're asking for access to my house. I'm asking for family to help family." I carried the folded towel to the dresser and set it down squarely. "No." Her voice sharpened. "You are one person in a 3-bedroom house. 2-bedroom plus office. Fine, even worse. That much room sitting there while Ava works at the kitchen table every night." I let the silence stay where it was. When I didn't answer, she kept going. "I'm not saying move in. I'm saying use what you have in a way that actually helps somebody." That was Dana's gift. She could reframe intrusion as efficiency. I walked to the window and looked out over the backyard. Wind moved lightly through the tree at the fence line. Somebody nearby was burning wood, or maybe running a smoker. The smell came and went. "I'm not discussing this anymore," I said. Then I ended the call. An hour later, she texted, "You always think the worst of me. I saved that one too." The next visit happened on a Thursday evening, and this time she came alone. No box, no kids, no soft edges. I had just finished dinner and was rinsing a plate when the doorbell rang. Through the front camera, I saw her standing there with one hand on her purse strap and the other tucked into her coat pocket. I considered ignoring it. Instead, I opened the door but left the storm door closed between us. She smiled a little, but her eyes moved past me toward the hall. I was nearby. "I can see that." She shifted her weight. "Can we talk like normal people?" "We are." That annoyed her. Her smile thinned. "You know what I mean?" The porch light caught the side of her face. Behind her, the street was dark except for the glow from windows and one passing set of headlights moving slow at the corner. She said, I don't understand why you're acting like I'm a threat. I said nothing. Then she tried a different route. Ethan's been having a rough time. He needs space, quiet, structure. You of all people should understand that. It was a smart line, pulling my service into the conversation without saying the word. Still, I didn't move. You're not using this place the way a family could. There it was, stripped down cleaner than before. I rested one hand lightly on the inside handle of the storm door. This place isn't community property. Her jaw tightened. No one said it was. You keep speaking as if you did. The silence after that sat between us for several seconds. I could hear a dog collar jingling somewhere down the block. I could smell somebody's dryer vent on the cold air. Finally, she said, "You really think so little of me." That sentence used to buy her room. Not anymore. I think you need to leave. She stared at me, then gave a soft little laugh with no warmth in it. This is going to look really ugly when the family hears about it. I answered, "That's your decision." Then I closed the door. Not hard, just final. From the hallway, I watched through the side window as she stood on the porch for another few seconds. Then she stepped down, looked once toward Elena's house, and drove off. I pulled the camera footage right away and saved it under the date. That night, I also wrote down her exact words while they were still fresh. You're not using this place the way a family could. Sometimes the important thing in a conflict is not the volume, it's the wording. The next week, I had to leave town for a short 3-day training block. Before I left, I checked everything in sequence: front lock, back lock, garage entry, windows, camera feeds, motion alerts. Then I texted Elena and told her I'd be gone until Friday evening. She replied with a simple thumbs up, and I'll keep an eye out. The hotel was plain and over air-conditioned, the kind of place with beige carpet and lamps that never give enough light. On the second night, I was sitting on the edge of the bed reviewing training notes when my phone buzzed with a message from Elena. "There are lights on at your place." I looked at it for a full second before opening the camera app. The front exterior looked still. Driveway empty, porch dark. I switched to the back camera. Nothing. Then the indoor camera loaded. At first I saw only the kitchen, dim but not dark. One light was on over the sink. My first thought was that maybe I had left it on. Then movement crossed the frame near the counter. A person. Then another. I sat up straighter on the bed. The audio was faint, but I could hear something. Music maybe, low and muffled. The angle didn't show the whole room, but it showed enough. A hand set down a glass on my counter. Someone opened the refrigerator. A figure passed by wearing a coat I recognized before my mind had fully caught up. Dana. She moved through my kitchen like she had every right to. For a second, I stayed completely still. No rush, no noise, just that familiar cold settling in behind the ribs when a suspicion stops being a suspicion and becomes fact. Then the camera caught something else. She reached into her purse and laid a key on the counter beside her phone. My key. And that was the moment the situation stopped being personal and became procedural. I took one slow breath, picked up my phone, and started making calls. I called local police before I called anyone else, not because I wanted drama, because by then I had enough facts to stop treating it like a family issue. Unauthorized entry. Active occupancy. Video evidence. Known person. I gave the dispatcher the address, told her I was out of town on training, and explained that I had indoor camera footage showing people inside my house without permission. She asked whether I knew who they were. I said yes. My sister is one of them, I told her. There was a brief pause on the line, then her voice stayed level and professional. Do they have permission to be there? No. That answer mattered. I could feel it even as I said it. No long explanation. No family history, no apologies layered around the truth. Just no. She asked if there might be a key involved. I told her I believed a key had been copied without my permission and that I had footage showing my sister placing a key on my kitchen counter. She said officers were being dispatched and asked me to remain available by phone. When I hung up, I called Elena. She answered on the second ring. I saw more cars pull up, she said quietly before I could speak. I stayed inside. That was the right call. Her voice lowered even more. I'm sorry. I looked at the hotel wall in front of me, blank beige with one framed print hanging crooked over the desk. This isn't on you, I said. Then I ended the call and opened the camera feed again. The picture was steady. Dana had moved out of the kitchen and into the living room. I could only see part of it from the indoor angle, but I could hear enough now to know there were several people in the house. Laughter, cabinet doors, music turned just loud enough to fill the rooms. Once, footsteps thundered overhead. It's a strange thing, watching people occupy your space through a phone. Everything looked familiar and wrong at the same time. My chair, my counter, my kitchen light, my floor. But the movement inside it all belonged to other people. I could hear Dana's voice now and then. Not every word, just the shape of it. Easy, relaxed, like she was hosting something ordinary. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, elbows on my knees, phone in both hands, and kept my breathing even. This was the part where a lot of people would call and start yelling. I didn't. Yelling wouldn't restore a lock. It wouldn't preserve evidence. It wouldn't matter in a report. So I waited. A few minutes later, headlights crossed the front exterior camera. Then another set. Then the flash of patrol lights painted briefly across the porch rail. The front door camera showed officers walking up in a controlled line, not rushed, not uncertain. One of them knocked. Hard. The sound didn't carry clearly through the app, but I saw the reaction inside. Shapes shifting, movement stopping. Then the door opened. A young man I didn't recognize appeared first, speaking with his hands, before the officer had even finished the first sentence. One of the officers stepped slightly forward. Another remained angled toward the entry. Professional. Measured. No wasted motion. More people came into view behind him. Then Dana. Even through the limited angle, I knew her posture immediately. Chin lifted, one hand up, explaining, reframing, trying to move the moment into language she could control. It didn't work. The officer at the door stayed steady. Another asked for everyone to step outside. Through the front camera, I watched them come out one by one. Dana first. Then Ava, pale and quiet, jacket pulled tight around herself. Then Ethan, looking stunned in that blank way people do when consequences arrive before they have time to build a story around them. Then two other adults I didn't know well, but recognized vaguely from old family gatherings and social media photos. Then the young man from the door again, now much less animated. The neighbor's porch lights started coming on up and down the street. A curtain shifted in one house. Elena's front room lamp stayed on, but she didn't come outside. Good. The officers separated people on the lawn. One remained at the doorway while another spoke into a radio. The music inside had gone silent by then. My house looked bright and exposed under the lights, every window suddenly public. One of the officers called me from the scene. His voice was direct and calm. He confirmed my name, asked me to state clearly that no one present had my permission to enter or use the home, and asked whether any of them had ever been given a key. I told him this. No one has permission to enter when I'm not there. No one was invited. No one was allowed to host anyone in the property. I believe my sister copied a key without consent. He asked whether I wanted the incident documented formally. Yes. Another pause. Do you want them trespassed from the property? Yes. He said they had already recovered a key from one of the individuals outside and would note it in the report. He also said there appeared to be no immediate structural damage visible from the front rooms, though he advised I inspect everything in person as soon as I returned. I thanked him, not because I felt relieved, just because he had done his job cleanly. After the call, I sat in the hotel room for a long minute with the camera feed still open. The officers were finishing up outside. Dana turned once and looked back at the house. Even from that distance, on that small screen, I could read the expression. Not shame, not really. Disbelief. As if she could not quite accept that the line she crossed had held. The next morning I drove home before daylight. Training could wait. Paperwork could be handled later. I packed in silence, checked out at the front desk, and got on the road with a paper cup of bad coffee and a headache sitting right behind my eyes. The drive felt longer than it was. The highway was mostly empty at that hour. Gray sky, trucks moving steady in the right lane, rest stop signs passing by in regular intervals. I kept both hands on the wheel and let the road settle me back into sequence. Arrive, inspect, document, replace, report. By the time I reached the neighborhood, the sun had just started to come up. The house looked normal from the street. That was the strange part. Porch, driveway, shutters, nothing broken from the outside. You could have driven by and thought nothing had happened. Elena was already on her porch in a sweater, holding a mug in both hands. She gave one small nod when she saw my truck. I parked, stepped out, and walked over before even unlocking my front door. She didn't say much, just told me what she'd seen. Cars arriving around 9:30, music after 10, lights on upstairs near midnight, police a little after that, Dana arguing, though not loudly enough for Elena to make out words, kids looking miserable, one officer doing most of the talking. "Thank you," I said. She shook her head once. "I'm sorry it turned out like this." I looked back at the house. It turned out the way it was already headed. Then I went inside. The smell hit first. Wine, sweet soda, stale food, too many people in a closed space. The living room looked mostly intact at a glance, but not untouched. Cushion out of place, coaster missing from the side table, a throw blanket dragged half onto the floor. In the kitchen, there were glasses in the sink, crumbs on the counter, one cabinet standing open, and a plate with dried sauce on it beside the stove. Upstairs was worse in small ways. One bedroom door left open, closet shifted, bathroom hand towel on the floor, my office chair rolled away from the desk. Nothing dramatic, just evidence of use, assumption, presence where there should have been none. I took photos of everything before moving anything. Wide shots first, then closer ones, kitchen counter, entry hall, living room, stair rail, guest room, office. Every image time-stamped automatically to my phone. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and called the locksmith. He said he could be there by noon. After that, I called the police station and asked what the next step was for adding my in-person statement to the incident report. They told me to come in that afternoon and bring identification, plus any video or documentation I wanted attached. I said I would. Then I opened the file drawer, pulled out the folder, and started arranging everything in order. Closing documents, locksmith invoice from the first rekey, screenshots from the cameras, text messages, my written notes with dates and times, the page where I had written, "She watched the keys." One of the camera clips showed Dana setting the copied key on my counter. I saved that twice. By late morning, the locksmith had changed every cylinder again and upgraded the front deadbolt. I watched him work in the same quiet way I had the first time. Metal parts lined neatly on a cloth, old hardware removed, new hardware fitted and tested. When he finished, he handed me 2 fresh keys and said, "No one gets in with the old set now." I nodded once and put them in my pocket. Then I drove to the station. The lobby smelled faintly like copier paper and old coffee. A television in the corner was on low with closed captions running under a weather report. A young officer at the desk asked my name, checked a clipboard, and told me to have a seat. A few minutes later, they brought Dana in through the side door. Not in handcuffs, not dramatic, just escorted. She saw me and stopped short. Her coat was wrinkled. Her hair looked pulled back too fast. Ethan was with her, and so was one of the women from the house the night before. Dana's face changed 3 times in about 2 seconds. Surprise, anger, Then that practiced strain of hurt she reached for when she wanted to turn consequences into cruelty. She stepped toward me. "Ryan," she said, voice already tight, "tell them this got out of hand." I stayed seated. "It didn't get out of hand," I said. "It was unauthorized." Her mouth parted a little, like the wording itself offended her. "We were just there for one night. In my house. The kids needed space. It wasn't yours to use." That was the whole thing, really. Not the noise, not the mess, not even the copied key. Reality itself. A place can belong to one person, even if someone else wants it more. Dana leaned closer. "You really called the police on your own family." I looked at her the same way I had looked at the report folder an hour earlier. I reported unlawful entry into my home. For once, she had no quick answer ready. An officer opened the door to the interview room and said my name. I stood, picked up the folder, and followed him inside, while Dana stayed in the lobby behind me, breathing hard enough that I could hear it. Then, the door closed. The interview room was colder than the lobby. Not freezing, just over-air-conditioned the way government buildings often are. Metal table, 2 chairs, a box of tissues pushed to one corner. The walls were plain except for a clock that ticked quietly enough to notice once the door shut. I set the folder on the table and took out what mattered. Printed text screenshots, my written notes with dates and times, still images from the indoor camera, the locksmith invoice from the first recce, the second invoice from that morning. Then I waited. The officer across from me didn't rush. He asked clean questions in a clean order. When did I close on the house? Who had been told? Whether I had ever given my sister a key? Whether I had invited her over? Whether I had given her permission to use the home in my absence? No, 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 no. The answers were simple because the facts were simple. Then I showed him the messages. "The kids are excited. We can be there in 20. We might need a quiet place for Ava to study sometime. You're not using this place the way a family could." Then I showed him the still from the camera where Dana placed the key on my kitchen counter while I was out of town. He studied it for a second and nodded once. "That helps," he said. I gave him the dates of the drive-by visits, told him about the first unplanned stop with the bakery box, told him about her eyes landing on the keys, told him I had rekeyed the locks once already after moving in and again that morning after the break-in. He took notes the whole time, not dramatic, not emotional, just process. That was the part people often miss. Truth does not need to perform, it just has to hold. When we were done, he asked whether I wanted to proceed with trespass documentation and any related charges the report could support, based on the copied key and unauthorized entry. I said yes. Then he asked one more question. "Do you want us to note that no future contact at the residence is permitted?" "Yes," I said. He added it. That mattered too. Boundaries mean more when they are written down. When I stepped back into the lobby, Dana was still there. Ethan sat beside her now, elbows on knees, staring at the floor. The other woman from the house the night before had moved farther off and was pretending to scroll through her phone without seeing anything on it. Dana stood the second she saw me. Her eyes were red, but not from crying. Not really. More from anger held too long. "You're actually doing this," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. That surprised me a little. She had finally understood that volume wasn't going to change the shape of the room. I stopped a few feet away. "I already did." She let out one short breath through her nose. "Over a misunderstanding." "No. Ryan, we didn't steal anything." I kept my voice even. "You entered my house without permission using a copied key." Her face tightened. "The kids needed room." That is not a defense. For a second, she looked like she might say something sharper. Instead, she reached for the familiar line. "We're family." I had heard that sentence in one form or another for years. Around money, around favors, around obligations nobody voted on except the person creating them. I answered the same way I had learned to answer dispatchers, officers, supervisors, lenders, inspectors, plainly. That doesn't override consent. The words landed harder than anything louder would have. Dana stared at me. Ethan looked up then, just briefly, and I saw something in his face that had not been there before. Not agreement, not even apology exactly. Recognition. He was old enough now to understand that adults could be wrong in ways that paperwork would not smooth over. Dana tried once more. You could have called me. I did something better, I said. I documented it. That was the moment the conversation ended, even before either of us moved. She knew it. I knew it. There was nothing left to persuade. The facts had already been handed over in a folder with dates, times, screenshots, and reports. An officer opened the side hall door and said her name. She looked at me one last time, waiting maybe for softness, maybe for a rescue line, maybe just for the old version of me who would step in and absorb the damage so she could keep moving. That version didn't arrive. She went through the door. I walked out the front. The afternoon air felt dry and bright after the station. My truck was warm inside from sitting in the lot. For a while, I just sat there with both hands on the wheel and the folder on the passenger seat. Not relieved, not triumphant, just settled. The house was quiet when I got back. The new locks clicked cleanly when I tested them. The upgraded deadbolt had a heavier feel than the old one. I checked the cameras, reset the motion zones, changed the passwords again, and wrote the new lock serials into the back of the folder. Then I cleaned. That part mattered more than I expected. I stripped the bed in the guest room and washed the sheets, even though they didn't look dirty. I wiped down the kitchen counters twice. I cleaned out the refrigerator shelf where somebody had left an open bottle lying on its side. I vacuumed the living room, then moved the chair back into its exact place and straightened the rug underneath it. The house began to sound like itself again. Vacuum hum, cabinet doors, water running in the sink, dryer thumping softly down the hall. Simple domestic noise. The kind that restores order because it comes from your own hands. Elena knocked once near sunset and left a container of soup on the porch, chicken and rice by the smell of it. I opened the door before she got all the way back to the sidewalk. You didn't have to do that, I said. She turned and gave a small shrug. Still thought you might not feel like cooking. I thanked her. She looked toward the house, then back at me. Everything all right? The honest answer was no, not completely. Not yet. But I said, everything's clear. She nodded like that was enough, and in that moment, it was. That evening, my phone lit up 6 times. Dana, then an unknown number, then Dana again. I didn't answer any of them. The voicemails came in anyway. I didn't listen right away. I just saved them into the same folder structure I had already started building. Video, texts, reports, calls. Sequence matters when things get complicated. It keeps emotion from rearranging the facts later. By Monday, extended family had started circling. My aunt called first. Careful tone. Wanted to understand what happened. I gave her one sentence. There was an unauthorized entry into my home and I handled it through the proper channels. She tried to soften it. But with your sister? I said, yes. That was enough. A cousin texted something longer about stress and kids and how maybe this could still be worked out privately. I didn't answer him at all. Instead, I added the screenshot to the folder. Not because he had done anything illegal, because patterns spread when they are not named. At work, I kept things brief. Tyler heard enough through mutual contacts to know something had happened, but all he said was, "House okay?" "Yes." That's what matters. He went back to whatever he was doing. I appreciated that. There's a certain kind of respect in not mining someone else's trouble for conversation. A few days later, I got confirmation of the updated report and the no contact note tied to the residence. I printed it, hole-punched it, and set it in a plain black binder I bought on the way home. The front label read, Property, security, incident. Again, not dramatic. Just organized. When people imagine consequences, they often picture one big scene, one speech, one final showdown in a driveway or over a dining room table. Most of the time, it's quieter than that. It's emails, invoices, signed statements, printed stills from a camera, a line in a report saying entry was unauthorized, a second line saying future contact at the property is not permitted. That is how reality hardens. That Friday, I came home, changed out of my work clothes, and stood in the kitchen for a long minute with no phone in my hand and no sound in the house except the refrigerator running. The light was low and gold through the back window. Dust moved slowly in it. The counters were clean. The sink was empty. My keys sat in the locked drawer now, not out in the open. I made coffee even though it was late for coffee. Then I carried the mug to the front porch and sat down. Across the street, Elena was trimming something in a planter box. A kid farther down the block bounced a basketball 2 houses over. A dog barked once, then gave up. Somewhere somebody was grilling onions. The smell drifted on the air and stayed for a few seconds before moving on. The neighborhood had already gone back to normal. That was the part I found most instructive. What felt life-changing inside one house often becomes a brief disturbance everywhere else. Porch lights go off, curtains close, traffic moves on, people return to their own dinners, their own laundry, their own news. And if you let them, manipulative people use that to make you question yourself. They count on time making things blurry. That was why I kept the binder. Not to stay angry, to stay accurate. My phone buzzed once more in my pocket while I sat there. Dana again. I didn't take it out. I let the vibration stop on its own and watched the street until the light changed and the evening settled all the way in. Then I went inside and locked the door. A week later, I took a Saturday morning and put the whole house back into a rhythm that felt like mine. Not repair work exactly. More like resetting. I washed the porch rail where somebody had set down a sticky drink. I wiped the front door glass inside and out. I organized the hall closet so the shelves sat clean and even again. Then I went upstairs with a laundry basket and moved room by room, putting everything back where it belonged. Fresh towels in the bathroom, clean sheets folded in the linen closet, office chair centered at the desk. Guest room window cracked for a few minutes to let the air move through. The weather had cooled overnight, and the house held that dry, early fall feeling I've always liked. Sunlight came in clean through the windows. Outside, I could hear a leaf blower somewhere down the block and the faint clink of somebody unloading groceries from a trunk. Nothing dramatic, just ordinary life. I made coffee around 10 and stood at the kitchen counter while it brewed. The machine hissed once, then settled into its quiet, dripping sound. I could smell the grounds before the first cup was full. When I poured it, the mug felt warm and solid in my hand. That was the thing I appreciated most after all of it. Not that the situation had ended. People don't usually end that neatly. Dana still texted now and then. My aunt still sent one careful message every few weeks, usually some version of hope things calm down soon. Once, Ethan sent a short note of his own. Not polished, not strategic. Just a few lines saying he knew things had gone too far and that he was sorry for being there. I believed he meant it. I answered him the next day. I kept it simple. I told him I appreciated the apology. I told him I hoped he made better decisions going forward. I did not invite him over. I did not reopen anything. I just answered the message that was in front of me. That felt fair. Ava never contacted me directly, and I didn't push for that. Kids carry enough weight from adult mistakes without being asked to sort through them on schedule. As for Dana, I stopped expecting understanding from her. That probably sounds harsh. It didn't feel harsh. It felt accurate. Some people do not become reasonable just because the facts are clear. They become quieter for a while, or more careful with language, or more wounded in presentation. But quiet and accountable are not the same thing. That was one of the more useful things this taught me. So I adjusted accordingly. I kept the binder in the study closet. I kept the no-contact paperwork where I could find it quickly if I ever needed it. I kept the cameras running and the locks updated and the porch light on a timer. Then I lived my life. That was the part I had been working toward all along. Not the conflict, not the boundary itself. What comes after the boundary holds. I started sleeping better. Not every night at once, but steadily. The kind of sleep where you stop listening for every creak in the house and start trusting the sound of your own routines. Coffee in the morning, work during the week, yard on Saturdays, laundry on Sundays. Small things handled when they needed handling. I bought 2 plain shelves for the garage and installed them one afternoon with the radio on low. I finally framed a map I'd been meaning to hang in the office. Elena came over once with sweet bread, and I sent her home with half a pan of cornbread a few weeks later when I made too much chili. That was enough company for me. Quiet, decent, uncomplicated. One evening near the end of the month, I was out front pulling a few weeds along the walkway when Elena came back from a walk with her little dog. She stopped at the sidewalk and looked toward the porch. "House seems peaceful again," she said. I straightened up and brushed dirt off my hands. "It is." She nodded. "You kept it that way." I thought about that after she went inside. Not because it sounded profound. It didn't. It sounded practical, which is probably why it stayed with me. Peace doesn't always arrive on its own. Sometimes you keep it. Sometimes you document it. Sometimes you lock the door and don't apologize for the sound it makes. Later that night, I walked through the house with the lights turned low. The floors creaked lightly under my feet. The kitchen was clean. The living room looked settled. The upstairs hallway held that faint smell of clean cotton from fresh laundry. I checked the back door once, out of habit, then stood for a moment with my hand resting on the frame. For years, I had thought the dream was the house. What I really wanted was the right to decide what happened inside it. That was the deeper thing. The order, the consent, the quiet. The fact that a locked door could finally mean what it was supposed to mean. Every extra shift, every deployment, every cheap apartment and skipped trip and careful budget. It all led to something simple enough that a lot of people would miss its value. A calm room, a safe kitchen, a front porch where nobody got to vote on my life anymore. That was enough for me. A few days later, I got a call from someone at the base asking if I knew a retired sergeant from another unit who was having trouble with family, borrowing his truck and using his address for things he never agreed to. I did know him, a little. Good man. Quiet. Too patient from what I remembered. I said I'd talk to him if he wanted. Not because I had all the answers, just because sometimes people need to hear that boundaries can be built late and still hold. That evening, I made tea instead of coffee and sat on the porch until the streetlights came on. A breeze moved through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, kids were still laughing over something. The neighborhood settled the way it usually did, one house at a time. I looked at the front door, the windows, the yard, the line of the porch rail in the fading light, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was bracing for anything. I just felt at home. If you stayed with me through this, I appreciate it. If this story meant something to you, go ahead and like the video and subscribe to the channel. And in the comments, tell me what city you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always like seeing where people are listening from. 2 popular stories will be waiting for you next, and I think you'll want to hear both.